Stick around until the end to see how this dedicated principal fixes and becomes an important figure in all of the students' lives. Today, we're recapping the movie titled Lean on Me. Spoilers ahead, and let's dive right in. Back in the 60s, East Side High School was the talk of the town in Paterson, New Jersey. Known for its success, Joe, a beloved teacher at the school, has won the hearts of his students by making learning both meaningful and enjoyable with his unique approach, including fun competitions. One day, Joe's class is interrupted by another teacher, Frank, who informs him about a union executive board meeting happening without their knowledge. Enraged, Joe storms into the meeting and lets loose on everyone, expressing his frustration at their lack of support for his reform ideas. He accuses them of always caving into pressure from the local government to maintain silence instead of standing up for what's right. Fed up with Joe's antics, the board decides to move him to a different school. Fast forward 20 years, and East Side High has descended into chaos, earning itself the reputation of being a hotbed of violence. The once gleaming school building now appears run down, and the students have lost sight of proper conduct. Bullying and violence run rampant in every corridor, with teachers being ignored or even assaulted when they attempt to intervene. Illegal drugs and weapons are exchanged as casually as sweets. Let me guess, they want him back, don't they? Most of the students are failing to meet the minimum basic skills test, spelling trouble for Mayor Botman. He's desperate to avoid losing control of the school to state administration, especially with the election looming. Frank, now the school superintendent, and Mr. Rosenberg, the school board attorney, reach a logical conclusion. They need to bring Joe back. Botman isn't thrilled about it, but he begrudgingly agrees because he's left with no other options. Frank and Rosenberg visit Joe, offering him the position of principal at Eastside. Initially hesitant, Joe rejects the offer, seeing through the mayor's ulterior motives. However, Frank convinces him otherwise by highlighting Joe's lack of impact with his previous unconventional methods. Realizing there's still a chance to make a difference, Joe reluctantly accepts the offer and shows up at Eastside the next day as the new principal. He gathers the other teachers and wastes no time asserting his authority, declaring he's the sole voice in his meetings. Requesting a roster containing the names of all students engaged in unlawful acts, he directs the custodian to scrub the walls and assign detention students to assist. Mr. Darnell, previously an English teacher who is now demoted to the football coach's assistant. Maybe he can use his sweet English talking skills to soothe the football players. In the hallways, there will be guards to aid in curbing violence, and teachers are to prioritize preparing students for the upcoming standardized test, aiming for a 75% approval rate, as the previous score was less than 40. Later, Joe convenes a school assembly, where the troublemakers listed are brought to the stage. While making his way through the crowd, Joe encounters Kenesha, who greets him warmly as if he was her elementary school principal. Joe steps onto the stage and calls for silence, but his words fall on deaf ears as the troublemakers ignore him and even laugh when he requests them to sing the school song. Seeing their defiance is unchangeable, Joe decides to expel all the troublemakers, assuring the rest of the students that they won't face any further disturbances. Security escorts the students off the stage, which helps restore calm, especially when Joe warns them that they could meet a similar fate if they don't focus on their studies. Later that afternoon, Joe holds a meeting with all the parents. Liana, the mother of one of the expelled students, expresses her anger about the situation, with many other parents supporting her. However, Joe stands firm, delivering a speech about how a few disruptive individuals can spoil the entire environment. He explains that he expelled 300 students to safeguard the remaining 2,700, emphasizing his commitment to saving the school as he promised to God. This speech gains Joe the backing of nearly every parent except for Liana, who remains resentful. Why are the bullies' parents always such pushovers? The next day, Joe arrives at school to find a student waiting for him. Sams, who had been expelled, attempts to convince Joe that he made a mistake because he didn't do anything wrong. However, Joe sees through this deception and takes him to the rooftop. There, he confronts Sams, calling him a coward for not being honest with his parents about his expulsion, and warns him about the dangers of consuming illegal substances. Emphasizing that it could cost him his life, Joe challenges Sams, suggesting that if he truly wants to risk his life, he should just jump off the roof. Sams adamantly refuses and promises to do better. Joe agrees to give him another chance, but warns him that if he fails again, he'll be permanently expelled. I like how he's singling out the students and giving them advice, just like a father. During lunchtime, Joe goes from table to table, chatting with the students and offering advice. He's pleased to see Ray dressed in a suit, setting a positive example, unlike Sams and his friends, who are dressed untidily. When he observes them bothering a girl, Joe makes them stand up and criticizes their choice of attire in front of everyone, then requests them to sing the school song. He also reminds the entire room not to move during the school song, so when Darnell leans over to pick up some litter, Joe sends him to his office. Since the boys don't know the lyrics, Joe assigns them detention and announces to everyone that they should all be prepared prepared to sing the school song whenever asked or face consequences. Later on, Joe visits the music teacher, Elliot, to inform her about the new policy. Elliot agrees, but suggests teaching the school song after they finish preparing for an upcoming choir concert in New York. Currently, the kids are rehearsing Mozart, and Elliot wants their efforts to be valued. She confronts Joe, noting his discomfort when challenged by other adults. In response, Joe dismisses her from her position and cancels the concert to allow students to focus on the upcoming test. Moving forward, Mrs. Powers, the pianist, will take over the music class. Later, during his discussion with Darnell, Joe faces criticism once again. Darnell feels disregarded and believes the principal should acknowledge that these students are also his responsibility. As a result, Darnell ends up being suspended. Vice Principal Joanne attempts to reason with Joe, highlighting Darnell's multifaceted role and expressing confusion over Joe's actions. However, Joe insists that the lack of understanding is intentional. On the day of the practice test, students diligently completed under the watchful eyes of the teachers. Eager for the results, Joe sends Joanne to the school board to request the letter directly. In the midst of a special presentation a student is delivering for the local press one morning, chaos erupts in the cafeteria as an attack unfolds. It turns out, one of the previously expelled boys has returned, violently assaulting Ray and brandishing a knife. Joe swiftly intervenes, apprehending the attacker, but questions arise about how he managed to gain access. Security speculates that someone from within may have facilitated his entry. In response, Joe promptly implements a new security measure, locking and chaining all school doors. Joe to the rescue! Maybe he was a self-defense teacher before becoming a principal. A while later, Joe notices Kenesha looking downcast. Despite being bright, her academic performance has suffered since losing her home due to her mother's rejection. Determined to assist, Joe accompanies Joanne to visit Kenesha's mother at her residence. The mother reveals that she became a parent during her teenage years, leading her to sacrifice her regular life for work. Presently, she's striving to overcome her struggles with substance abuse, which has left her in a difficult mental state. Consequently, she believed it was best to entrust Kenesha to child services, but emphasizes that she never stopped caring for her daughter or wanting her around. Joe promises to support her in securing better employment and a more suitable living situation on the condition that she welcomes Kenesha back home and aids her in maintaining focus on her studies. This guy is very good at finding common ground with people. The story about the locked doors spreads to the newspapers, prompting Liana to seize the opportunity to bring her grievances to the attention of the school board. Frank criticizes Joe for his erratic behavior, noting that Liana is gathering a coalition to expel him, with support from the fire chief. He believes Joe is isolating himself as he did with his wife, and advises him to apologize to Elliot and Darnell. Frank suggests that if Joe desired respect as a figure of authority, he must first show respect for authority figures. Darnell is reinstated, but the challenges persist. The fire chief arrives at the school, accompanied by the press. So, Joe uses a bat to encourage him to leave. Joanne attempts to voice her anxiety about Joe's behavior, but as usual, her concerns are disregarded. Who's gonna stop him though? To Joe's dismay, he encounters Ray again, who informs him that he's leaving the school for good. Later, Joe discovers Sam's and his friends fooling around in the restroom. He instructs them to sing the school song and is pleasantly surprised to hear a beautiful rendition resembling a church choir. The boys confess that it was Powers who taught them this version, prompting Joe to commend her and request that she teach it to everyone going forward. Upon receiving the results of the practice test, Joe is disheartened to see that they only achieved a score of 33%. He gathers all the teachers in the gymnasium and attributes these poor results to their inefficiency, urging them to put in more effort. Joe aims to initiate a tutoring initiative and offer additional correctional reading classes on Saturdays, despite concerns from a teacher about student attendance on weekends. His strategy involves personally visiting each student's home to engage with their parents, and possibly even encourage them to participate if they struggle with reading. I just knew the teachers would argue against it. It's all fine when students need to do extra work until the teachers are forced to as well. In the following weeks, both teachers and students diligently prepare for the upcoming test, with Joe actively involved in supporting his students. However, Liana remains dissatisfied and collaborates with the fire chief to directly confront Botman. Despite Frank and Rosenberg's attempts to defend Joe, Botman strikes a deal with Liana to secure her support for his campaign. In exchange for not swaying public opinion against him, Botman agrees to terminate Joe's employment. In a more casual setting, Botman talks with the fire chief about their plan to arrest Joe for the unauthorized chains post-test, oblivious to Rosenberg eavesdropping on them from the stalls. Upon learning of this scheme, Rosenberg promptly alerts Frank, and together they rush to inform Joe. Thinking on his feet, Joe devises a strategy. Once the security guards spot the chief approaching, they'll issue a Code 10 signal over the walkie-talkies, allowing the teachers to temporarily remove the chains. Nice thinking on his part. Later, Joanne tries to chat with Joe about how the reading program is going, but he brushes her off, saying he's too busy to deal with it and that his vice principal should handle things without always relying on him. By the day's end, Joanne requests a transfer, venting her frustration about working with him. She labels him as a self-absorbed yapper who bullies those unable to defend themselves, and notes that many of the staff share the sentiment, though they haven't left yet because they care about the students. Joanne, however, has reached her limit with his disrespect and lack of support for the teachers, so she's ready to leave. The following day, just before the assembly, Joe hands Joanne her transfer papers. Then he addresses the students, talking about the school's negative reputation in town and encouraging them to demonstrate that they're not undisciplined. He also expresses appreciation for the teachers, specifically mentioning Joanne's contribution. Later, Powers performs Lean on Me, and the students eagerly join in, eager to prove their worth to the authorities. Witnessing the unity of the entire school, Joanne changes her mind and decides to stay. Of course, she decides to stay now. On test day, the students tackle the exam with confidence, but looming is a school board meeting, and Liana's patience is small. Finally, Bodman gives the fire chief permission to obtain a court order. Meanwhile, at school, Kanisha learns she's pregnant, but her boyfriend doubts he's the father despite her assurance that he's the only one she's been with. Joe lends his support, assuring they'll explore other options. But their conversation is cut short by a guard announcing the arrival of the fire chief with Liana and reporters. Among the chaos, Joe tries to address the situation, but the fire chief is prepared with evidence, leading to Joe's arrest for violating the fire code, leaving Joanne in charge. That evening, the school board convenes for a meeting. Frank attempts to defend Joe's efforts, but Liana highlights that the school only scored 33% on the practice test, indicating Joe's failure in his role. The meeting is abruptly disrupted as every student arrives, demanding Joe's release. Bodman recognizes the optics of firing someone with such widespread support, so he approaches Joe, asking him to persuade the students to leave. When Joe declines, Bodman warns of potential police intervention outside, fearing violence if the students riot. Joe agrees to address them, not because he believes they're in the wrong, but for their safety. Facing jail time, and he's still thinking about the students. What a guy. As Joe addresses the students, Liana tries to intervene, but faces insults and reminders of Joe's contributions to the school. Moved by their affectionate references to him as a father figure, Joe remains concerned about the potential police action. He steps in, urging the students to respect the law. However, Joanne interrupts with the test results, revealing that the school has passed. Amidst celebration, Joe defiantly tells Bodman and the state to go to hell. Ultimately, Joe retains his job, and the night concludes with the students singing the school anthem. As the seniors prepare to graduate, Joe hands out the diplomas, offering each student personalized words of care and encouragement. This just goes to show that good father figures are important with every teen. I really liked how this movie showed that doing good deeds always comes back to you. I rate this movie an 8 out of 10. What do you think? Looks like this movie pill is starting to wear off. But don't worry, there's always more where that came from. Tap here to keep the effects going with this next movie, because who can stop at just one? And while you're at it, don't forget to like and subscribe, because your next movie dose is just a click away.